You lost, ma'am. Best turn around and head back where you came from.
Yeah, move along now.
Here you are, ma'am. Be sure to share them.
Thank you, sir. You are too kind.
Outside the Silver Saddle Saloon, a weathered bench sat beneath a narrow awning, offering the only shade for half a block. Clara Mayfield walked slowly toward the saloon, a wicker basket clutched against her chest. Inside lay 24 honey cakes, golden and fragrant, wrapped carefully in clean linen. She had spent the morning baking them for Mrs. Henderson, the saloon owner who occasionally hired her mother for washing linens. Clara hoped the gesture might secure more work for her ailing mother. As she approached, she noticed a group of young men sprawled across the bench, their boots propped up, hats tipped low over their eyes. They were ranch hands from the Callaway spread, known for their crude humor and casual cruelty. Clara's heart sank, but she kept walking, her eyes fixed on the saloon door. One corner of the bench sat empty. Clara hesitated, then lowered herself carefully onto the worn wood, trying to occupy as little space as possible. She had learned long ago to make herself small, to disappear into corners and shadows, to avoid drawing attention. But invisibility was never an option for someone like her. "Well, well," drawled a voice thick with whiskey. Tommy Briggs, a sandy-haired young man with cruel green eyes, sat up and stared at her. "What do we have here?" Clara kept her eyes down, her fingers tightening around the basket handle. Her heart hammered against her ribs. "Looks like someone's taking up more than her fair share," another one chimed in, and the others erupted in laughter. "No seat for fat," Tommy declared, placing his hand against her shoulder and shoving hard. The world tilted. Clara felt herself falling, the basket flying from her hands. She hit the dusty ground hard, her hip striking a loose stone. Pain shot through her side. The honey cakes scattered across the dirt, some splitting open, their golden insides now coated in grime. Laughter echoed around her, not just from the men on the bench, but from passers-by who had stopped to watch. Women whispered behind their hands. Children pointed. A shopkeeper stood in his doorway, shaking his head with a mixture of pity and disgust. Clara's face burned hotter than the sun above. Tears stung her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had cried too many times in her 24 years. Instead, she knelt in the dirt, gathering the ruined cakes with trembling hands, trying to salvage something from the disaster. Maybe she was going to eat them all herself, Tommy said, and fresh laughter rang out. Clara's hands froze over a broken cake. The words cut deeper than any physical pain. They always did. Then the laughter stopped. A shadow fell across the dusty street, long and dark. The temperature seemed to drop despite the scorching heat. Clara looked up and saw a man dismounting from a massive bay horse. He was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in worn buckskin and leather, a thick beard covering the lower half of his face. His eyes, pale blue and piercing, swept over the scene with an intensity that made even Tommy Briggs straighten. Elias Boone, the mountain man. Clara had heard stories about him, the hermit who lived somewhere in the high country, who came to town only rarely, who spoke to no one and wanted nothing from anyone. Without a word, Elias walked forward. The crowd parted instinctively. He bent down and began picking up the scattered honey cakes, his large, calloused hands surprisingly gentle as he placed them back in the basket. Then he extended his hand to Clara. She stared at it, unable to move. No man had ever offered her his hand before, not like this. "Ma'am," he said quietly. His voice was deep and rough from disuse, but there was kindness in it. Clara took his hand, and he pulled her to her feet effortlessly. He brushed the dirt from her skirt with careful, respectful movements, then handed her the basket. Then Elias Boone turned to face the men on the bench. His expression hadn't changed, but something in his stillness was terrifying. "If there's no seat for her," he said, his voice low and measured, "then none of you deserve to sit." Tommy opened his mouth, closed it, then looked away. The other men shuffled their feet, suddenly fascinated by their bootlaces. Elias turned back to Clara. "Where were you taking these?" The saloon?" Clara managed to whisper. "Then I'll buy them all. What's the price?" Clara blinked. They're not for sale. They're a gift for—" "I'm buying them," Elias said firmly. He pulled a leather pouch from his belt and pressed several silver coins into her hand, far more than the cakes were worth. "And I'll take another 24 next week. Bring them to the North Trail at sunrise. I'll meet you there." Before Clara could respond, Elias took the basket from her hands and walked away, his horse following behind him like a loyal dog. The crowd watched in stunned silence as he disappeared down the dusty street. Clara stood frozen, the silver coins cool against her palm, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. Around her, the whispers began anew, but she barely heard them. For the first time in years, someone had seen her, really seen her, and he had stood up for her when no one else would. That night, Clara lay awake in the small room she shared with her mother in the back of Mrs. Henderson's boarding house. The moon cast silver light through the threadbare curtain, illuminating her hands as she turned the coins over and over in her fingers. Her mother's labored breathing filled the darkness. Martha Mayfield had been strong once, but years of hard work and a brutal marriage had worn her down to skin and bone. She coughed in her sleep, a wet, rattling sound that made Clara's chest tight with worry. Clara closed her eyes and tried not to think about her father. Samuel Mayfield had been a mean drunk, quick with his fists and quicker with his tongue. He had died 5 years ago when his horse threw him during a storm, and Clara had stood at his grave feeling nothing but relief. Her mother had wept, but Clara suspected those tears were for the girl Martha had been before marriage, not for the man in the coffin. Fat Clara. The words her father had used echoed in her memory. "No man will ever want you. You're good for nothing but cooking and cleaning, and you're barely good enough for that." She had believed him. Why wouldn't she? Everyone in Dust Creek seemed to agree. The other girls her age had married and started families. Even the plain ones, the poor ones, had found husbands. But not Clara. She was invited to no dances, received no awkward courtship calls, attracted no lingering glances. Except today. Today, Elias Boone had looked at her. Not through her, not past her, not with disgust or pity. He had simply looked at her as if she were a person worthy of dignity. Clara opened her journal, the leather-bound book she kept hidden under her mattress, and began to write by moonlight. A stranger helped me today. A mountain man with kind eyes and a voice like distant thunder. He picked up my broken cakes and treated me like I mattered. I don't understand why, but for the first time in years, I feel something other than shame. I feel seen. 8 miles north of Dust Creek, Elias Boone sat on the porch of his log cabin, watching the stars emerge one by one over the Rocky Mountains. The honey cakes sat on a rough-hewn table beside him, untouched. He hadn't bought them because he was hungry. He had bought them because the look on that girl's face when she fell had pierced through the armor he'd spent 8 years building around his heart. Elias reached into his shirt and pulled out a small wooden carving, a horse, its mane flowing, legs frozen mid-gallop. He had made it for June, his daughter, for her 6th birthday. She had died 3 days before that birthday, her small hand clutched in his, her fever burning her up from the inside while snow piled higher and higher outside their cabin, trapping them miles from any doctor. Lydia had gone first. His wife had caught the fever trying to nurse their neighbors, and it had taken her in 2 days. June had lasted 4. Elias had been helpless, watching them slip away despite his desperate prayers, his frantic attempts to cool their fevers, his bargaining with a God who seemed deaf to his pleas. He had buried them when the snow finally melted, digging through frozen ground until his hands bled. Then he had walked away from that valley and never returned. He had abandoned his faith, his friends, his former life. He lived alone now, trapping and hunting, existing but not living. Until today, when he saw a young woman pushed into the dirt and heard the casual cruelty and the laughter that followed. Something in him had broken, or perhaps something had healed just enough to feel pain again. He couldn't save Lydia and June, but he could help this girl. Elias set down the carving and picked up one of the honey cakes. He bit into it, and the sweetness flooded his mouth. It tasted like sunshine, like warmth, like everything he had lost. He closed his eyes and, for the first time in 8 years, allowed himself to remember what it felt like to sit at a table with people he loved, sharing food and laughter and life. Clara woke before dawn and baked through the early morning hours. Her mother stirred as the smell of honey and cinnamon filled their small room. "Where are you going with all those?" Martha asked weakly. "A customer," Clara said, wrapping the cakes carefully. "A good one. He paid triple what they're worth." Her mother's eyes narrowed with worry. "Clara, be careful. Men don't pay that kind of money for nothing." "He's not like that, Mama." Clara wasn't sure how she knew this, but she did. "He's different." The North Trail began where Dust Creek ended, winding up into pine forests and rocky slopes. Clara had never traveled it before. It was steep and lonely, used mainly by trappers and hunters heading into the high country. As the sun broke over the eastern peaks, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Clara saw him. Elias Boone stood beside his horse at a bend in the trail, his figure silhouetted against the morning light. He looked like something from a storybook, a fairy tale her mother used to tell about mountain spirits and wild men who lived between earth and sky. "You came," he said as she approached, and there was genuine surprise in his voice. "You paid for them," Clara replied, offering the basket. Elias took it and handed her a small cloth bag. Inside, Clara found not just coins, but also a jar of wild honey, darker and richer than anything sold in town. "From my hives," Elias explained. "It's good honey, better than store-bought." Clara looked up at him, really looked at him for the first time. His face was weathered and scarred, his beard streaked with gray, but his eyes held a gentleness that contradicted his fearsome appearance. He looked tired, she thought, tired and sad and lonely. "Why are you doing this?" The question escaped before she could stop it. Elias was quiet for a long moment. his gaze drifting to the mountains behind her. "Because kindness is rare," he finally said, "and when you find it, you should honor it." He meant her cakes, Clara realized. He thought she was the kind one, when in truth he was the first person to show her genuine kindness in years. "Next week?" Elias asked. Clara nodded. "Next week?" As she walked back down the trail, the sunrise warming her shoulders, Clara felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. It took her several minutes to recognize it. Hope. Word spread through Dust Creek like wildfire. Fat Clara was meeting the mountain man. The town had nothing better to do than speculate, and speculation quickly turned vicious. "She's trying to trap him into marriage," Mrs. Calloway announced at the general store. "Poor man doesn't know what he's getting into." "Maybe he's desperate enough," another woman replied. "Living alone up there all these years, any woman might look good after that long." Clara heard the whispers when she walked to the well. She saw the looks when she bought flour at the store. But she kept going to the North Trail every week, and every week Elias was there. They didn't talk much at first. He would take the basket, pay her generously, and send her on her way. But gradually the exchanges grew longer. He asked about her baking, and she asked about his trapping. He told her about the eagles nesting near his cabin, and she described the wildflowers growing behind Mrs. Henderson's boarding house. One morning, as summer deepened into late July, Elias said, "You're welcome to come up to the cabin, if you'd like. It's cooler up there, and I have tea." Clara hesitated. Going to his cabin felt different from meeting on the trail. More intimate, more dangerous, at least in terms of what people would say. But she was tired of living her life according to what other people thought. She nodded. "I'd like that." The cabin was simple but well built, nestled in a clearing surrounded by towering pines. Inside, everything was neat and spare. A table, 2 chairs, a stone fireplace, shelves lined with books that surprised Clara. She hadn't expected a mountain man to be a reader. Elias made tea from wild mint and sat across from her at the table. For the first time, Clara saw his home, saw the small details that revealed his life. A whittling knife and several wooden carvings, a rifle mounted over the door, and on a high shelf, barely visible, a woman's shawl and a child's rag doll. Clara's heart ached. She understood then. He wasn't a hermit by choice. He was a widower hiding from grief in the mountains. "You lost someone," she said softly. Elias's hands tightened around his cup. "My wife, my daughter, 8 years ago. I'm sorry. So am I." He looked at her, and his eyes were hollow with old pain. "Every day I'm sorry." They sat in silence, but it was a comfortable silence. 2 wounded people sharing space without judgment. As autumn approached, Clara's visits to the cabin became regular. She brought food. He provided venison and fish. She told him stories from town. He showed her how to identify animal tracks. They worked side by side in companionable quiet, and slowly, without either of them quite realizing it, something grew between them. Clara wrote in her journal late at night, her words spilling across the pages with increasing urgency. "I think I'm falling in love with him. How foolish is that? A man who lives alone by choice, who lost his family and retreated from the world. And me, the girl nobody wanted. What kind of future could we possibly have? But when I'm with him, I forget to feel ashamed. I forget to make myself smaller. He looks at me like I'm just a person. Not too much, not too little, just right." Elias, for his part, found himself thinking about Clara during the long evenings alone. He remembered how she laughed when a chipmunk stole a piece of bread from her hand, how she squinted in concentration while learning to gut a fish, how her face lit up when she talked about her mother getting stronger. He remembered what it felt like to care about someone, and it terrified him. One evening in late September, as Clara prepared to leave, a storm rolled in fast. Lightning split the sky, and rain began to pour in sheets. Elias couldn't send her down the mountain in such weather. "You'll stay here tonight?" he said firmly. "I'll sleep on the floor. You take the bed." Clara protested, but he wouldn't hear arguments. She lay awake in his bed, smelling pine and leather and smoke, listening to him breathing on the other side of the room. In the darkness, she whispered, "Elias?" "Yes." "Thank you for everything, for being my friend." A long pause. Then, "You're welcome, Clara." Neither of them slept much that night. October brought rumors that escalated into threats. Someone painted words on Mrs. Henderson's boarding house: "The Pig Girl's Whore Den." Martha, already weak, suffered a collapse from the stress. Clara nursed her through feverish nights, her own heart breaking. Tommy Briggs and his friends, emboldened by whiskey and mob mentality, decided to rescue Clara from the mountain man's clutches. They saw themselves as heroes in a story where Elias was the villain and Clara was too stupid to know she was being used. On a cold October evening, as Clara walked home from the market, they cornered her in an alley. There were 5 of them, their breath reeking of alcohol, their eyes glittering with malicious intent. "We're doing you a favor," Tommy said, grabbing her arm. "That mountain freak is just using you." "Let me go," Clara said, trying to keep her voice steady. "No man could actually want someone like you," another one sneered. "He's probably laughing at you behind your back." They shoved her, jeering and taunting. When Clara tried to run, someone threw a stone that hit the back of her head. Pain exploded across her skull. She stumbled, fell, and the world tilted sickeningly. She heard their laughter fading as she lay in the dirt, blood trickling down her neck. Tears finally came, hot and bitter. Maybe they were right. Maybe she had been foolish to believe someone could care about her. Darkness crept in at the edges of her vision, and Clara let it take her. Elias found her 2 hours later. He had come to town to trade pelts and heard the commotion. When he saw Clara's mother frantically searching the streets, terror gripped his heart. Together they searched until Elias spotted her crumpled form in the alley. He lifted her as if she weighed nothing, cradling her against his chest. Blood matted her hair. Her breathing was shallow. Rage and fear warred inside him, but fear won. He carried her up the mountain to his cabin, his horse following behind with Martha. For 3 days, Clara drifted in and out of consciousness. Elias sat by her bedside, changing the bandages on her head wound, coaxing water and broth between her lips. He barely slept, terrified that if he closed his eyes, he would wake to find her cold and still, just like Lydia and June. On the 4th day, Clara woke fully. Her eyes focused on Elias's face, haggard with worry and lack of sleep. "You're here," she whispered. "Where else would I be?" His voice was rough with emotion. They said you were just using me, that you were laughing at me." Elias took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle around hers. "Clara Mayfield, I have not laughed in 8 years, not until I met you. You made me remember what joy feels like." Tears spilled down Clara's cheeks. "Why? Why do you care about someone like me?" "Someone like you?" Elias's voice rose with uncharacteristic passion. "You mean someone kind? Someone brave? Someone who makes honey cakes that taste like sunshine and talks to chipmunks and sees the good in a broken old man who doesn't deserve it?" "You're not broken," Clara said. "Yes, I am, but so are you, and maybe that's why we fit." He hesitated, then said the words he had sworn never to say again. "I'm falling in love with you, Clara, and it scares me to death because everyone I've ever loved has been taken from me." Clara sat up, ignoring the pain in her head, and touched his face. "Then love me harder while you have me. Don't waste time being afraid." Elias kissed her then, a gentle, reverent kiss that tasted of tears and promises. When they parted, he pressed his forehead against hers. "I won't let them hurt you again," he said. "Then let's not give them the chance. Let's leave." But before they could leave, Dust Creek came for them. The next morning, a dozen men on horseback rode up to Elias's cabin. Tommy Briggs led them, carrying a torch despite the daylight. "We know you're in there, Clara," Tommy shouted. "Come out. We're taking you back where you belong." Elias stepped out onto the porch, his rifle in hand. "She belongs here, with me. Leave, or I'll make you leave." "You've bewitched her," a man yelled. "Probably got her under some kind of spell." "The only spell is kindness," Elias said coldly. "Something none of you know anything about." The cabin door opened, and Clara emerged. She looked pale and unsteady, the bandage still wrapped around her head, but her eyes were clear and determined. "I'm not bewitched," she said, her voice carrying across the clearing. "I'm in love. I'm in love with a man who treats me with respect, who sees me as a person, who doesn't judge me by my body or mock me for existing. And I'm leaving Dust Creek with him because this town has shown me nothing but cruelty since the day I was born." "You're making a mistake," Mrs. Calloway shouted from horseback. "He'll abandon you." "No," Clara said firmly, "he won't, because he knows what it's like to lose people. He knows what it's like to be alone, and he chooses me anyway, not despite who I am, but because of who I am." She turned to Elias. "I'm ready. Let's go." Elias lowered his rifle and took her hand. Together they walked to his horse. Martha, who had been watching from inside, emerged with a small bundle of belongings. "I'm coming too," she announced. "I should have left this town years ago." The men on horseback looked at each other uncertainly. Without violence or drama, their righteous mission had deflated. They watched in silence as Elias helped Clara and then Martha onto his horse, then mounted behind them. As they rode past the group, Elias paused beside Tommy Briggs. "If there's no seat for her, then none of you deserve to sit. I meant that, and I mean this. If any of you come near her again, you'll answer to me." Tommy looked away, shame finally coloring his features. They rode down the mountain and away from Dust Creek. Clara didn't look back. There was nothing behind her worth seeing. They traveled north for 3 weeks, following old trappers' trails deeper into the Montana wilderness. Elias knew a valley, he said, where settlers were scarce and communities were too busy surviving to care about gossip. They found land near a small creek, surrounded by aspens that turned gold in autumn. With Martha's help, they built a larger cabin, sturdy enough for a family. Elias taught Clara to trap and hunt. She taught him to plant a garden. Martha, growing stronger in the clean mountain air, took charge of preserving food for winter. On a crisp November evening, as the first snow began to fall, Elias and Clara stood together beside the creek. No preacher was available for 100 miles, so they married themselves, speaking vows under a sky brilliant with stars. "I promise to love you," Elias said, "not because you're perfect, but because you're perfectly yourself. I promise to protect you, to honor you, and to spend every day grateful that you chose me." "I promise to love you," Clara said, "for teaching me that I'm worthy of love, for seeing me when everyone else looked away, for choosing me when you could have chosen safety." They exchanged rings carved from deer antler, and Martha cried happy tears. Winter was hard, but they survived it together. Spring brought wildflowers and hope, and in late summer, Clara discovered she was pregnant. Elias wept when she told him. Tears of joy and terror mingled together. "I'm afraid," he admitted. "So am I," Clara said, taking his hand. "But we'll face it together." Their son was born in March, healthy and loud. They named him June, in honor of the daughter Elias had lost. It felt right. Like closing a circle that had been broken for too long, Clara nursed June while snow fell outside their cabin, and she watched Elias carve small wooden animals for the baby. Her heart swelled with a happiness she had never imagined possible. "Do you ever regret leaving?" Elias asked one evening as they sat by the fire, June sleeping between them. "No," Clara said firmly. "I don't miss a place that made me feel worthless. Here I'm valued. Here I'm loved. That's all I ever wanted." "You deserved it all along," Elias said quietly. "I just hope I can give you enough." Clara smiled. "You give me everything that matters." Years passed. June grew into a strong, kind boy who had his mother's gentle nature and his father's quiet strength. Martha lived to see her grandson take his first steps, to hear his first words, to know her daughter was finally, truly happy. When Martha passed peacefully in her sleep at age 68, they buried her beside the creek, under the aspens she loved. Clara grieved, but it was a clean grief, uncomplicated by regret. Her mother had known love in her final years. Elias and Clara grew old together. His beard went white. Her hair went gray. They added rooms to their cabin for the 3 more children who came after June. They built a life measured not in wealth or status, but in shared meals, small kindnesses, and the quiet contentment of being truly known by another person. On her 50th birthday, Clara sat on the porch of their cabin, watching her grandchildren play in the meadow. Elias sat beside her, his hand wrapped around hers like it had been for 26 years. "Do you remember the day we met?" Clara asked. "Every detail," Elias said. "I remember thinking you had the saddest eyes I'd ever seen, and I remember wanting to change that." "You did," Clara said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "You gave me a life I never dreamed possible." "No," Elias corrected gently. "You gave yourself that life. You chose to believe you deserved better. I just had the good sense to agree with you." Clara smiled. In the meadow, June lifted his daughter onto his shoulders. She squealed with delight, and the sound carried on the wind. Pure, joyful, innocent. "We did good," Clara said. "We did," Elias agreed. As the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, they sat together in comfortable silence. 2 people who had found each other in the worst circumstances and built something beautiful from the wreckage of their former lives. The world had told Clara she was too much. Dust Creek had pushed her aside, mocked her, tried to make her believe she was unworthy of love or dignity or respect. but the world had been wrong. She wasn't too much. She wasn't too little. She was exactly enough. And in the end, that was all that mattered. In the distance, wolves began their evening song, a wild chorus that spoke of survival and strength. Clara closed her eyes and listened, remembering the girl who had fallen in the dust, humiliated and alone. That girl was gone now, replaced by a woman who knew her worth, who had found love in the most unexpected place, and who had learned that kindness could heal even the deepest wounds. Behind them, the cabin glowed with lamplight. Smoke rose from the chimney, carrying the scent of fresh bread. Honey cakes, actually, because some traditions were worth keeping. Inside, their family gathered for supper, their voices a warm murmur of love and belonging. This was home. This was enough. This was everything. And it had all begun the day a mountain man decided that cruelty should not go unanswered, that dignity mattered, and that sometimes the most broken people can help each other heal.